In 2023, Nintendo released a remaster of Metroid Prime 1, just over 20 years after its initial release. It reviewed extremely well across the board, and both newcomers and returning players alike raved about the game, much like its initial release. The world and audio design, the atmosphere, and the gameplay were all just as good as they were 20 years earlier. What the remaster showed is that the Metroid Prime series still has a place in today's game industry, and not just as a relic of the past. But when Metroid Prime 4 released just a couple years later, the reception couldn't have been more divisive. Critic reviews of the game were the lowest in the mainline Prime series, but were still largely positive. Its online reception from the general public, where opinions were more varied. I've heard everything from it being a return to form for the series that's every bit as good as the originals, to an outright bad game with little to no redeeming value. So what happened here? How did this game go from being a highly anticipated sequel to one of the most divisive titles in recent memory? What exactly went wrong with Metroid Prime 4 Beyond? Full spoilers ahead. I played through Metroid Prime 4 twice for this video. When the credits rolled after my first playthrough, I was deeply disappointed. But upon starting my second playthrough, I almost forgot what it was that disappointed me so much in the first place. Prime 4 gives a great first impression. It begins with some simple backstory. A Galactic Federation research facility is under attack by Xelios, a rogue bounty hunter with an army of space pirates under his control and Metroids that, for some reason, have the ability to fuse with other life forms. Samus happens to be on another mission nearby and is called in to help. We get this brief cutscene showing the combat zone in the air and on the ground. Samus makes her entrance, and with that, you're already in the game. It's a very quick intro, no lengthy cutscenes or dialogue. While Metroid's past attempts at making cinematic and narrative-heavy games haven't been too successful, this opening was very strong and very promising. This first level, the research facility, is just a tutorial level, but it looks great, sounds great, teaches all the basics, and has a fun boss fight at the end. After this is where the game truly begins. Xelios makes his entrance, and in the battle that ensues, he shoots this ancient artifact, which envelops the surrounding area and transports Samus to the planet Phenoros. This next area, Chrono Tower, is a dramatic change of pace, but exceptionally well crafted in its own right. Where the Galactic Federation research facility was fast-paced and combat-heavy, Chrono Tower is instead quiet and mysterious. The architecture here is grand in scale, and the music strange, but with a sense of life and purpose. Your scanner can't identify much of anything around you, that is, until you receive the Psychic Crystal. With it, you're able to learn about the Lemorn, an ancient species that lived here long ago and have since disappeared. Samus comes across a holographic recording left behind by a Lemorn priest who hoped that, one day, a savior would find and bring the memory fruit to another world to carry on the legacy of their people. It's here that Samus also learns how to get off this planet. There are 5 teleportal keys scattered throughout Phenoros that need to be collected and brought back to the top of the tower. For all the faults this game might have, the presentation is not one of them. The Prime series has always received extremely high praise for their immersive settings, and Prime 4 deserves that same level of acclaim. I played the Switch 1 version of the game, and it's fairly impressive what Retro Studios managed to pull off with such dated hardware. But it's not the technical details that make the presentation so special. It's the artistic design of the different biomes of Phenoros that left me awestruck. The sheer scale of Fury Green, the imposingly crafted structures of the Volt Forge, the ominous and industrial design of the Flare Pool, the snowy, mountainous range of the Ice Belt. It's not just the environments that are well presented either. The opening menu is mysterious and alien. The UI is unobstructive, easy to read, and reinforces that sleek sci-fi setting. The audio design is so clean and detailed that every creature, every tiny bit of movement comes to life. And the soundtrack is spectacular. The original Prime trilogy has some great music too, but I honestly believe that Prime 4 might have the best soundtrack of the whole series. The music can be dramatic and nostalgic. Or it can be alien, yet still inviting. It can be empowering. It can make you feel as though you are truly on a grand adventure. I also want to highlight this one very small section of the game, the Undergrowth of Fury Green. Between this eerie and foreign music, the scuttle of bugs and the growls of far-off beasts, the quiet and weighty steps that Samus takes as you wander deeper and deeper into unknown territory, this right here is peak Metroid Prime. There are moments like this, moments that shine as brightly as anything from the original trilogy, but they don't last for long. Metroid Prime 4 is an expertly presented game, but the narrative, world design, and gameplay never come together to form a strong and cohesive experience. Its genre feels like something between the Metroidvania design adopted by the original trilogy and a linear action shooter like Halo. But this lack of commitment one way or the other results in a game that winds up excelling at neither of these designs. Prime 4 is at its best when designed like a linear, level-to-level FPS. Take the Ice Belt, for instance, which has you travel to the far end of the region to turn on the power generator. The journey there is slowly paced, with a focus on exploration and lore. But once you get the generator working, then the whole place goes into lockdown, and the place is flooded with these rabid beasts known as Grievers. The level shifts its focus to being a fast-paced, combat-heavy return trip through areas you've already been. But with the doors locked, you're also forced to find new ways through the facility. Taken as a single level in a first-person shooter, it's fun, it's well-paced, it's at times creepy and mysterious, and at others, it's adrenaline pumping. Your first trip through the Volt Forge is much the same in terms of quality. First, you go down through the towers. They are almost eerily quiet and still, with inactive machinery lying all around. But then you get the power on, and those machines all come whirring back to life, and now you have to travel up through the tower, avoiding the machines while they carry out their duties, or using them to your advantage to move on. But the flaws start to show themselves more strongly in the later areas of the game. The Prime series has never been known for having complex combat systems, but what made previous games enjoyable was the variety of enemies that you would come across and the different methods in which you had to deal with or avoid them. Each region of the world also had their own unique enemies that you wouldn't find anywhere else. Space pirates would often appear all throughout the game, regardless of the area you were in, but they would get new abilities, attacks, and resistances the further you progressed, requiring a change in strategy. Prime 4 has very little in terms of enemy variety. Across the 5 regions of Xelios, you will battle mostly Grievers, Cybots, and little else. There are variants of these enemies, but none of them are different enough to change your approach to combat. No matter what kind of Cybot you encounter, you freeze it with the ice shot, then shoot it with missiles. For the Grievers, you just point and shoot. There is no strategy needed beyond that, even on the hardest difficulty. The Ice Belt and the Volt Forge sections that I mentioned are both early on in the game. By the time you reach these areas, enemy variety hasn't yet become a noticeable issue, but the final area of the game, the Great Mines, showcases this problem at its absolute worst. The level is almost entirely made up of Griever battles, just waves and waves of Grievers, then a short breather section made up of light platforming and yapping from your companions, and then right back into more waves of Grievers. It's one of many instances where the game peaks early on. The combat system itself isn't inherently bad, but it also doesn't evolve or develop into anything more than it started as. What this game does get right about the combat is the boss fights, which are all unique in design and require different strategies to overcome. You largely just have to point and shoot their weak points, but what makes the bosses fun is their varying movement and attack patterns. You are constantly on the move in these battles, strafing or jumping or ducking in morph ball mode. It makes these encounters consistently engaging, as there's always something to attack or something to dodge, and there's no real repetition in these fights. Even the repeat Silex battles feel different from each other due to him having different attacks and abilities each time. I genuinely enjoyed fighting almost every boss in the game. Where Metroid Prime 4 is most lacking, however, is when it progresses like a Metroidvania. Backtracking is a fundamental quality of the genre, and what makes it fun instead of tedious is how your return trips allow you to find secrets and new paths and areas you couldn't access before, or progress through the same area in a newer, faster, more efficient way, or maybe find new ways to old areas. Metroid Fusion is a good example of a linear Metroidvania with this design structure. The game is divided into 6 sectors, all connected by a singular hub area. When you first enter a new sector, you're immediately given the map, but not the entire map. There are many hidden routes throughout that you won't find until later on when you return with new abilities, and it's in these hidden areas that you'll find collectibles and connections between the different sectors. This makes each area feel much bigger than they initially appear, but Prime 4 is the opposite. There's really only the occasional collectible to find on return trips, with very little in terms of new areas to find, leaving you to mostly just retread the same rooms as before. These regions are presented like huge areas to explore, but are, in reality, much smaller than they appear. But that isn't even the worst of the backtracking. The world of Euros is made up of 5 regions that are only connected to each other by this desert, the Soul Valley. In typical Metroidvania design, you enter a new region and make a little progress before being blocked by a barrier of some sort, forcing you to travel to another region to find a new item or ability that allows you to get past that barrier later on. In Prime 4, that means you frequently have to return to this desert just to drive from one end to the other with almost nothing to do in between. A big part of this problem is the constant need to return to camp. You see, Samus wasn't the only one who was transported to this planet. 5 Galactic Federation soldiers, well, 4 plus a mech, also ended up here. You'll come across them as you explore the different biomes of Euros, and they'll help you search for the teleportal keys, whether you want them to or not. The first of these soldiers, Miles Mackenzie, is an engineer who hangs out at your camp in Fury Green, and you have to return to him to unlock each new beam ability. The worst case of this is when you obtain the ice chip from the ice belt. The next area to explore is the flare pool, but there's a pool of lava in the way before you can progress. So you have to leave the ice belt and travel through the desert to Fury Green so that Miles can install the ice chip, letting you use the ice shot. But then you have to travel through the desert again to the Volt Forge, drive 1 tower over to get the icy suit upgrade, which allows you to cross lava, and only then can you finally make progress through the flare pool. Keeping in mind that you have to sit through a loading screen every time you enter and exit a given region, that means this stretch from the end of the ice belt to the start of the flare pool involves sitting through 6 loading screens and 3 drives through the desert, all without any combat, puzzles, or platforming necessary. The game has you backtrack to these different regions not because there's something interesting to do or somewhere new to explore, but because that's what you do in a Metroidvania, and the progression suffers for it. And as for the desert itself, it is the antithesis to everything this game does right. Visually, it looks awful, the music is completely forgettable, and there is next to nothing to do here. Despite that, you will spend several hours of your playthrough here, mostly just traveling between the game's different regions. Soul Valley does have some collectibles to find and shrines with optional challenges to complete, but even after 2 playthroughs of this game, I cannot recall any of these that I would describe as particularly interesting. The shrines are 1, maybe 2 rooms of platforming, or some gameplay that can be very loosely described as a puzzle. While the collectibles in the desert amount to pull up this box with the lasso, or open this shutter by shooting it with a shock beam. There's this 1 missile tank upgrade that you can get by boosting off this ramp on your bike. And that's the most engaging gameplay you will find in the entire desert. There isn't even much by way of combat here. There are a total of 3 enemies and 1 boss to find in the desert, and combat consists of pressing the A button. Just pressing the A button, no aiming or thought necessary. Oh, sometimes you hold the A button when there are multiple enemies? Or better yet, you can just let the enemies defeat themselves. I simply cannot fathom what happened here. The rest of the game is mediocre at its absolute worst, but this desert is genuinely one of the most pathetic and poorly designed areas in any video game I have ever played. A common counter-argument I've seen in favor of the desert is that other hub worlds, most notably Hyrule Field and Ocarina of Time, don't receive the same criticism. And the reason for this is simple. That game is nearly 30 years old. If Ocarina of Time were released for the first time today, it would not receive a slew of 10 out of 10 reviews like it did before. It would not be seen as revolutionary. Standards and expectations have changed. Big, open, 3D environments were not commonplace in 1998, it was a much more unique concept for the time. It's not unique anymore, and Prime 4 shouldn't be criticized by the standards of 1998. There is nothing engaging, unique, or creatively done with the desert. It doesn't even have a day and night cycle or a weather system outside of one brief scripted instance of rain, which makes it a very static and boring environment. There's an odd contrast I see when people praise this game. In one camp, I see people praise the game as being yet another Metroid Prime, just as they remember, only with better graphics. But there's another camp that praises the game for daring to push the series forward in a new direction as the first Prime entry in 18 years. But therein, I think, lies the problem. It is neither of those things. It doesn't modernize the original formula, nor does it push the series forward in any new or meaningful way. The original Metroid Prime games really committed to the idea of a Metroidvania in a fully 3D environment, but Prime 4 lacks the interconnectivity and gradual revealing of the world that's so core to the genre. And the items and abilities you find are largely the same as in previous entries, but utilized in less interesting ways. The Morph Ball, for instance, has the same standard upgrades as always: bombs, boost ball, spider ball. But Prime 4 doesn't do anything with those that we haven't already seen before in the original trilogy. It's especially disappointing when compared to Prime 2, which has more interesting and complex Morph Ball challenges, including entire boss fights designed around this. And that's not to say that Prime 4 has no new ideas at all, but what new ideas Prime 4 does have are really underutilized. My favorite new addition to the game is how the Spider Ball upgrade now allows Samus to slingshot off of these tether nodes. There is so much potential here for unique platforming challenges, but I can only think of one time the game really utilized it in an interesting way. Here you have to slingshot yourself up and bomb both of these red panels within a few seconds of each other in order to access the missile expansion. It's nothing complex or even especially difficult, but it pushes me to better master the tools that are made available to me, and it's something that I haven't seen done in any other Metroid game. But sadly, there are very few instances of this. On the other hand, the wide open hub area is definitely a bold new frontier for the series, but it's so underbaked and so poorly melds with the rest of the game's design that it actively detracts from the overall experience. When you're first let loose into the desert, Miles tells you,
"You found a teleporter key! Congratulations! Looks like there's 3 keys left. Up to you to decide which one to go after first."
But that's a lie. The truth is that the flare pool is the only area where you can do anything. I drove to the far corner of the map only to find that I was locked out of the mines, and then I went to the ice belt and found I was locked out of there too. Other Metroid games also lock you into a linear path at the start. There's nothing wrong with that. But those games also don't tell you that you can decide what objective to complete first. Retro Studios also aim to tell a more complex and emotional story with Metroid Prime 4. And again, this is not inherently a bad thing. Many longtime Metroid fans tense up at the prospect of new games in the series having a more cinematic and character-driven narrative, and that fear isn't unfounded. Metroid's best stories have always been minimalistic in their presentation, and attempts at more cinematic stories have been forgettable at best and disastrous at worst. Metroid Prime 4 is no exception. Over the course of the game, you will spend several hours with the different Galactic Federation soldiers, and in all that time, none of them develop beyond the cookie-cutter archetypes they start as. Miles McKenzie is a nerdy engineer who makes jokes, Rieger Tokabi is a quiet veteran soldier who believes in a god, and Ezra Duke is the commanding officer of Nora Armstrong. And that's it. That's the entirety of their personalities. They're mostly intended to be comic relief, but often end up being annoying instead. And it's not that they're never funny, it's just that it's mostly unintentional.
Takes more than that to bring me down. I'm down, Samus.
The only one of these characters that shows even a little bit of character development is Nora Armstrong. She's a rookie soldier who takes her duty seriously, but she also forgets herself and begins fangirling when she sees Samus for the first time. When you reach the final region, the Great Mines, you find the area absolutely swarmed with grievers, and Duke sacrifices himself so Samus and Armstrong can continue on and get the teleportal key. Armstrong briefly breaks down from this, having lost the one person that she's known since before coming to this alien world, but pulls herself back together to continue the mission. And when the Grievers swarm her and Samus again, she makes the heroic decision to sacrifice herself, having learned from her superior's selflessness. This is the only instance of character development, and that is simply not enough in a game that spends several hours on dialogue and cutscenes. It's made even worse given that Samus is a silent protagonist. Silent protagonists can and have worked before, but it typically requires them to show personality through other means, like facial expressions and body language. But Samus spends the entire game with her face covered up, and her body language is mostly just nodding at people. We never get the sense that she actually cares about the other soldiers. Take this scene at the end of the Great Mines where Samus finds out that Armstrong and Duke actually survived the Griever attacks. We don't see Samus so much as breathe a sigh of relief, she just looks at them. That is the entirety of her emotional depth. And while we're on the topic, the Great Mines features 3 instances of characters sacrificing themselves, and none of them, save the mech, come away with so little as a scratch on them. But even worse than that, their decision to sacrifice themselves in the first place is stupid as all hell. The mech staying behind makes sense, seeing as it is literally unable to follow you, but the other soldiers all stay behind to hold off a horde of Grievers, only their sacrifice doesn't slow down the horde at all.
Change of plans. Nah, you'll be safe. They can't follow you anymore.
These things have been tirelessly digging through the walls, the ground, and the ceiling to get to us. Why exactly would plugging a hole stop them from following us? Well, that's the thing. It doesn't stop them. These sacrifices meant nothing, and they accomplished nothing. But at least we now have all 5 teleportal keys in hand, so that means it's time to finish the game, right? Nope, we still have 2 more quests to complete before we're done. The first of these is about finding 6 different mech parts to rebuild a giant mech that can destroy the shield around Chrono Tower. Honestly, I didn't mind this too much, but upon further reflection, I don't feel this way because the quest is any good. I feel this way because the other quest is so much worse. Scattered throughout the desert are these green energy crystals, which we must break and collect until we fill up this meter. We're told to do this at the beginning of the game, but there's no clear reason why we should spend time on this. You do get upgrades for collecting enough of them, but you have to smash an absurd amount of these crystals before you get enough for even the first upgrade. The better thing to do is to collect crystals from shrines or destroy these crystal deposits instead, because they net you a far greater amount. The problem with this is that shrines can't be accessed until you have the necessary upgrade, and these crystal deposits can't be destroyed until you get the power bombs, meaning the majority of crystals can't be obtained until much later in the game. Even taking my time exploring, getting every crystal I found, and completing shrines, I still didn't even have 3/4 of the crystals I needed by the time I got power bombs. Exploring the desert and running through these crystals is a near complete waste of time, and the only good reason to do so is to get the upgrade for your basic beam attack. Filling the green crystal meter unlocks the memory fruit, which you need to complete the game even though it does absolutely nothing at all. It's not used in our escape, it doesn't do anything, there's no explanation that it will do anything at any point in time other than grow the way that plants tend to do. Narratively, the memory fruit is intended to carry forward the legacy of the Lemorn, but it's never explained what exactly that means or why we need to do it at all. This crystal hunt is one of the most widely disliked parts of the game, and I can't help but think that many people would have a much more positive outlook on the game if this just unlocked a secret ending for 100% completion instead. It still wouldn't have been good, but it wouldn't have forcefully bogged down the game for players either. Once you have the fruit in hand and the mech repaired, Samus and the Galactic Federation soldiers break into Chrono Tower to make their escape, but are stopped by Sylix for one final battle. Sylix, in case you forgot, is the antagonist of the game. I wouldn't blame you for forgetting. He shows up about 5 times in the entire game and has a total of 6 lines of dialogue. He lacks any real presence in the story outside of just showing up from time to time and being a little bit of a nuisance. Sylix's introduction in the opening level raised a lot of questions about him. Why are the space pirates working with Sylix? Why is Sylix attacking the Federation? What's his beef with Samus? How does he have Metroids under his control? Why are Metroids suddenly fusing with other creatures? None of these questions were answered over the course of the game. Instead, those answers are relegated to a logbook entry when you scan him for the final battle, as well as a secret cutscene unlocked with 100% scan and item completion. A cutscene that isn't even a part of the actual game. You can only find it in the art gallery after the credits roll. After defeating Sylux atop Chrono Tower, he makes one final attempt to stop our escape. He damages the teleporter and it's about to blow. The Galactic Federation soldiers hold Sylux down, sacrificing themselves so that Samus is able to escape. This time, for real, they're dead. Probably. I don't know. They faked us out 3 times already. I don't know why I should think this time is any different. In that unlockable cutscene, we learn that Sylux was once a soldier with the Galactic Federation. During a battle with some space pirates, Sylux attempted to obtain a space pirate weapon for himself, but Samus shows up and destroys it before he's able to reach it, and now Sylux is angry and wants revenge. That is the entire background to his character. That is a pathetic and juvenile attempt at characterizing the main villain of the game. Video games are a unique medium in that their narratives are often irrelevant to their artistic and entertainment value. How relevant the narrative is depends on how much of a focus the game has on it. It's the reason why mainline Mario games are almost never criticized for their stories, but the Paper Mario games are. The Paper Mario series spends a lot of time on cutscenes and dialogue, meaning that the writing has a much greater impact on the overall experience. The same is true for Metroid. The reason why Metroid Prime 1 is hardly ever criticized for its story is because the story is almost entirely told through your scanner entries and through the environment. You can engage with the story as much or as little as you like. Metroid Other M gets a lot more criticism for its story because of how much time is spent on dialogue and cutscenes. Metroid Prime 4 presents its story as being central to its overall experience, but its characters are without any real depth, the plot is lacking any sense of importance or purpose, and the villain's backstory is hidden away outside of the main game. Metroid Prime 4 excels in the presentation of its world and environments, but its story is such an underdeveloped mess that it drags the whole experience down. And with that concludes Metroid Prime 4 Beyond, a game that gives an incredible first impression, but has, ironically, nothing beyond those early impressions to make it worth your while. The art and audio teams deserve huge amounts of praise for their work here, but the story, combat, platforming, puzzles, world design, and progression are all lacking that same level of polish and care. Now, as negative as I've been about Metroid Prime 4, there are hints of a truly great game here, and I really do believe that there's potential for Retro to learn from their mistakes and make something truly great if given another chance. But I'm not holding my breath for that either. Thanks for watching.